In 1969, the world witnessed monumental events. Apollo 11's historic moon landing, Richard Nixon's inauguration as the 37th President of the United States, and the debut of Sesame Street on national education television. But another significant milestone, which often goes unnoticed, is that women were officially granted membership into the Future Farmers of America. This was a game changer, not just for agriculture, but for society as a whole, as it proved that farming and agriculture are for everyone. This made me think about the broader idea of equality and how crucial it is, not only for people, but also our environment. In fact, there is even sexism applied to plant and tree choices in urban environments. This might sound strange, but this practice is called botanical sexism, and it has real consequences for our communities. Botanical sexism, the widespread preference for planting male trees over female trees in urban environments, has triggered significant environmental and public health crises. Initially adopted to reduce the mess of fruits and seeds in public spaces, this practice has resulted in excessive pollen in the air and led to exacerbated allergies and respiratory problems, including asthma. The unchecked release of pollen from male trees is fueling rising rates of these diseases, particularly in densely populated U.S. cities. Most trees reproduce sexually, requiring the transfer of genetic material between male and female parts. Some trees are monoecious, having both male and female reproductive organs on the same tree. In contrast, dioecious trees, commonly planted in urban areas, have separate male and female trees. In a natural wooded environment unaltered by human bias, dioecious trees grow at a roughly equal male to female ratio. Human intervention in the natural order has caused the challenges now occurring in U.S. urban areas. The origins of botanical sexism trace back to mid-20th century urban planning, when cities were rapidly expanding and integrating green spaces into urban landscapes. Urban planners prioritized aesthetic appeal and low maintenance, strongly favoring male trees that produce no fruits or seeds. According to Climate Central, the rate of asthma, which often occurs alongside pollen allergies, nearly tripled between 1980 and 2010. Since then, the situation has only escalated. Several U.S. cities have felt the impact of botanical sexism. Albuquerque, New Mexico, suffers from high pollen counts due to a ban on planting female trees in public spaces in order to reduce fruit and seed cleanup. Phoenix, Arizona, and Los Angeles, California have faced similar problems. But where does Oklahoma stand in the United States pollen crisis? Allergy experts state that Oklahoma City is ranked the third highest city pollen count in the entire nation, followed by Tulsa, ranked at fourth. These examples show that the effects of botanical sexism are not isolated. They are widespread. Health consequences are becoming increasingly severe. Pollen-related allergies, once seen as a seasonal inconvenience, have become a serious public health issue. According to the Asthma and Allergy Foundation of America, over 80 million people in the U.S. suffer from allergies annually, with approximately 25 million of those people also having asthma. Pollen, one of the most common allergens prevalent in urban environments, is a direct result of overplanting male trees. Despite these challenges, trees remain crucial to urban ecosystems. They provide shade, reduce urban heat, filter pollutants from the air, and absorb carbon dioxide. Trees also promote biodiversity, support wildlife habitats, and offer mental and physical health benefits to residents. Studies show that access to green spaces can reduce stress, improve mood, and encourage physical activity. Trees are essential to maintaining healthy, sustainable cities. Given the overall positive effects of urban forestry, It is critical that cities adopt strategies to mitigate the negative health impacts of botanical sexism. One effective solution is to implement diverse planting strategies, balancing male and female trees in urban areas. Selecting tree species that produce less allergenic pollen is another strategy. Certain species release large amounts of highly allergenic pollen, while others produce smaller quantities, such as dogwood, magnolia, and tulip trees. Additionally, using fruitless cultivars bred to produce minimal fruit or pollen, such as the eastern redbud and bald cypress trees that grow well in Oklahoma, can offer a compromise. Effective tree planting strategies allow cities to maintain greenery without excessive maintenance or allergy concerns, reducing health risks and controlling pollen levels. Educating the public is another crucial step in addressing botanical sexism. Many urban planners, landscapers, and residents may be unaware of the health risks of male-dominated tree populations. Raising public awareness about the benefits of balanced planting and deliberate pollen control is key to fostering a more informed approach to urban greening. Revised forestry policies that prioritize biodiversity can encourage residents to plant female or low pollen trees in their yards. Additionally, agricultural advocacy organizations should collaborate with urban planners and local governments to develop tree planting programs that prioritize biodiversity, reduce pollen's health impacts, and foster healthier environments for both agricultural and urban communities. In conclusion, botanical sexism has led to significant public health challenges due to the overabundance of pollen in urban areas. As cities continue to grow, it is essential to rethink how trees are integrated into urban landscapes. Through balanced planting strategies, public education, and better maintenance practices, cities can mitigate the negative effects of botanical sexism while still enjoying the environmental and health benefits trees provide. The milestones the world witnessed in 1969 did not begin and end in that single year. Decades of good decision-making culminated in that amazing moment. We must begin now to make the good decisions that will end botanical sexism and create beautiful, healthy urban environments across the United States. Thank you.
Mayor Premier, congratulations on being here. Are there, plans? Do we have some sort of strategy to truly educate all these stakeholders? It sounds like that's maybe starting to happen, but are we really getting serious about this?
No, sir. So when it comes to educational efforts, particularly for overabundance of pollen or dioecious male trees in cities, there are very few educational opportunities about it. That's why I think an effective solution is to implement proper strategies in order to educate people.
You talk in your speech about how Oklahoma City is the third highest in the polling out. Does Oklahoma City have a ban on female trees yet, or do we have any strategies in place to combat this?
Yes, ma'am. So Oklahoma City does not actually have a ban on female trees. However, they receive trees from nurseries, and most of the time nurseries do actually only give out or sell dioecious male trees due to the fact that it's a easier convenience for them. So it's not necessarily that we have banned dioecious female trees in urban areas. It's more or less that it's not necessarily a major concern for urban planners.
When you talk about male trees were initially adopted to reduce the mess of fruits and seeds. So if I'm a city government and I want to incorporate more female trees into my plantings, what are the challenges that come along with that once I've made that decision to do so?
The primary challenge with planting dioecious female trees is just simply because it produces fruit and it produces debris. A lot of times if trees are placed over sidewalks, people can slip. It can cause more wildlife that you might not want to have in an urbanized area. But at the end of the day, the outcomes of planting more dioecious female trees do far outweigh the negatives of the dioecious male trees.
You frame our current situation as a pollen crisis. Curious, what are some of the other allergens that these cities are experiencing, and where does pollen fall within the contributions that it has?
Pollen is the _1 allergen in the United States, even in the world. Dust is a close second, and basically most air pollutants that can get gusted into the air by wind or from other pollinators is a major contributor to seasonal allergies.
You mentioned education is important, and you talked about a strategy, but I'd like you to actually continue to talk about that a little bit more. How do you believe high schools, junior colleges, land-grant institutions can take part in educating about botanical sexism and exclusions?
I think the most effective solution for educational opportunities is to focus on urbanized students. A lot of students, like for example, that go to Jinx, which is where I'm from, are very uneducated with the science behind monoecious trees, dioecious trees, stamens, pistils. So I think that if we can implement proper educational efforts, like for example, an Ag Fact of the Week, we can truly advocate and spread awareness about this topic.
Is there any research on there right now regarding maybe the biotech solution, trying to breed a female tree that might, have a suppressed amount of fruit, seed, that would actually be producing to help solve that problem?
Mm-hmm. There are a few tree breeds that have been bred specifically designed to prevent the overabundance of pollen in urban areas. For example, a white mulberry tree is a tree that produces an overabundance of pollen. And it's too much, right? So a tree like a tulip tree, which was specifically bred to reduce the amount of allergens in the atmosphere, is a great example of a solution and something that people have been researching.
Can you tell me which male trees are the worst pollen threats? And if we're still...
Yes, ma'am. So a white mulberry tree is the #1 biggest threat for overabundance of pollen. It has the most potent pollen, and it produces so much. A lot of times, if you ever see videos of foresters chopping down trees and there's just a white gust or a yellow gust of pollen falling behind it, that's typically a white mulberry tree. And that's just the most commonly planted tree specifically found in urban areas that produces an overabundance of pollen. Thank you.
It rained and rained for 40 days and 40 nights. This popular phrase from the biblical story of Noah's Ark tells of the trials and tribulations that Noah faced. At its heart, though, this story is one of preservation of species and genetic diversity. It was to prevent mass extinction. Unbelievably, we are in the middle of an extinction event happening right now. The 6th mass extinction in history, according to scientists. And we, that is humanity, are the ones causing it. Perhaps you think that the middle of a global crisis is not an appropriate time to be discussing seed banks. On the contrary, these events spark us to look at our own mortality and the parts of the food chain that make life possible. We need genetic diversity at each link in the chain. According to the Royal Botanic Gardens, an estimated 40% of plant species are currently threatened with extinction. Over the past 50 years, agricultural practices have changed dramatically, with technological advances allowing for large-scale crop production. However, while crop yields have increased, biodiversity has decreased, to the point that now only about 30 crops provide 95% of human food energy needs, with an estimated 90% of the world's caloric consumption consisting of just rice, wheat, and maize. The US has lost over 90% of its fruit and vegetable varieties since the 1900s. This monoculture puts us at risk for novel diseases and environmental issues that destroy entire crops. Thankfully, we do have banks to save seeds for those rainy days when their genetic diversity is needed. In today's world, we think nothing of storing important documents, precious family photographs, and important information online. Ideally, important digital information is backed up to the cloud or a hard drive. Likewise, the important crop genetics from regional seed banks is backed up to the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. This so-called Doomsday Vault opened in 2008 inside the Arctic Circle in the Svalbard Archipelago, Norway. Its intention was to be a politically neutral and safe location to protect the world's crop diversity. Samples sent here are duplicates from seed and gene banks, research facilities, and communities around the world, ranging from large institutions like ICARTA to Oklahoma's own Cherokee Nation, who last year became the first tribe in the US to send important heirloom seeds to Svalbard. As eloquently stated by Joseph Tome, Research Director of Agrobiodiversity at CIT, there is kind of a global system that, unfortunately, very few people appreciate until there is a tragedy. Unlike files on a hard drive, seeds in a vault cannot just be stored and forgotten. Even in the ideal, super-cooled conditions of the Svalbard Vault, seeds have a shelf life. It is up to each institution providing these seeds to be sure the collections in the vault are regularly updated with fresh, viable samples. Svalbard holds over 1 million backups of duplicate seed samples in case of any accidental loss of biodiversity. But it's not as safe as we need it to be. Its permafrost mountain home can no longer be relied upon to stay frozen, flooding the entrance in 2017. Svalbard is experiencing rapidly rising temperatures. It's also built at only 430 feet above sea level. All these preservation steps have been child's play compared to what scientists have dubbed Noah's Ark 2.0. According to many experts, the safest place to store valuable genetic information and seed stock is 62 miles away from right here. No, not in Oklahoma or even Texas or Kansas. 62 miles straight up in space. In 2020, an ambitious plan was unveiled at the IEEE Aerospace Conference to create the ultimate genetic depository on the moon. This project, developed by the University of Arizona, is to construct a solar-powered lunar ark in the moon's underground lava tubes. These formed billions of years ago when lava streams formed massive caverns more than 300 feet in diameter. They would give much-needed protection from solar radiation, meteors, and temperature changes on the surface. While the moon is not hospitable to humans, its harsh features make it a great place to store samples that need to stay very cold and undisturbed for hundreds of years at a time. Seeds will be cooled to minus 292 degrees Fahrenheit, and stem cells to minus 320 degrees Fahrenheit. For reference, the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine is stored at minus 94 degrees Fahrenheit. There, we would preserve human, animal, plant, and fungi samples in the event of a global crisis. All told, the Ark would safely store frozen eggs, seed, sperm, and other DNA matter from all 8.7 million Earth species. Robotic solar-powered caretakers would prepare, monitor, and store these samples as they arrive from Earth, as well as give us status reports and updates regularly. Transporting these seeds would be a monumental task. In order to store 50 samples from each of 8.7 million species, totaling 435 million samples, it would take over 250 rocket launches. That's 6 times more than it took to build the International Space Station, which required only 40 rocket launches. This daring plan would require a 30-year timeframe to achieve, but would protect the Earth's genetic diversity from anything short of a meteor strike. Neil Armstrong once said, "One small step for mankind." And now, 53 years later, it's one small seed for mankind. Perhaps this idea is far-fetched, But if I remember the story correctly, most folks thought that Noah's Ark 1.0 was crazy too. Thank you.
Hello, Marina. Congratulations on being here. The first question I have is, when we look at the amount of rocket launches and the amount of money it would take to construct this lunar ark, does that and how is the benefit of preserving these seeds outweighed?
Right now, this conceptual plan would have a budget of about $2.7 trillion, which is a little bit mind-blowing, especially in the forms of we don't have this money and neither does NASA. However, I do believe the benefit of having a backup that's not on Earth highly outweighs the monetary amount that we'd need to pay. However, I do understand hesitation when it comes to legislature and experts thinking, is this really truly what we want to do?
Congratulations, Brianna. You talk about how much agricultural practices and production have changed dramatically, even talking about 90% of our, losing 90% of our fruit and vegetable varieties. I'm just wondering if in your research you looked at some of the reasons for this, and I'd specifically be interested in any economic reasons for why we lost those varieties.
The biggest reason that I came across in my research is the genetic modification of plants to create the most yield out of the smallest seed. So we all want, when it comes to wheat, the most bushels per acre. When it comes to tomatoes, the most tomatoes on a vine. However, we take it a little too far and we end up losing the genetic diversity that we have, therefore getting rid of the originality that we once had, which creates problems in the future. Because as much data as you can put into a computer and punch out numbers and codes, nothing is going to compare to the real world, and you're not going to get your answer until harvest time rolls around.
I'm curious if you could speak a little bit more to some of these regional seed banks. You mentioned that they all are able to contribute to the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. Could you speak to some of the specific regional seed banks and their impact and requirements?
Well, obviously I'm a little biased. I like Oklahoma State's University Seed Vault the best, but I do know when it comes to our nation, the USA, we have a Fort Knox, we have a Fort Collins in Colorado, and it is our nation's seed bank. That's where most of our Svalbard seeds either get taken back from or pulled out of. However, when it comes to smaller regional areas, I know that Kansas State, Georgia University, and Oklahoma State University are the top three when it comes to donators and researchers.
Do you believe that it's just the United States that should fund this, or how would you get other countries involved if it is such a crisis?
That's a great question because no one owns the moon. The US does not own the moon alone. We just have a flag up there. So when it comes to the idea of, well, if we put a building on the moon, is China or Russia going to want to put one on the moon? Should we do one together like we have Svalbard? Svalbard itself is funded and run by the government of Norway. The US has nothing to do but putting seeds in and taking seeds back out. So the US, if we were to choose to put one on the moon, it would be entirely monetarily up to us in order to get everything up there. And I'm sure partnerships are possible, but with as conceptual and far out of reach this is, I doubt anyone would like to contribute besides the US.
I'm curious, the Cherokee Nation, what sort of seeds did they contribute to the Rural Way Seed?
The number one seed that they contributed with pounds, about a 10-pound bag, even though we normally only put 5 seeds in the vault, is the Cherokee White Eagle Gold Corn. That was their number one heirloom seed that they've had for the longest time, and that was the very first heirloom seed from our Cherokee tribe to be put into Svalbard.
In your speech, you say, thankfully we have these banks to have seeds for rainy days when genetic diversity is needed. Can you give me an example of when we would have had to bring that genetic diversity out of the seed banks and use it in modern day?
Absolutely. We actually use them all the time, the backup genetics that we have, especially in Oklahoma, when it comes to drought or wheat streak mosaic virus and stripe rust and all of the pest and disease resistance that we need to have. A lot of times, instead of experts looking for newer ideas or creating a better genetic code, they reference old material from the banks we already have and try and find a DNA strand that will work just a little bit better when it comes to drought or terrible environmental diseases like that.
Okay, so you convinced us to set up this seed bank on the moon. If one of those scenarios happens, how do Oklahoma producers access the seeds from the seed bank on the moon?
One of the main concerns that experts and researchers have is if any.
Thank you.
We, the jury of the San Francisco Supreme Court, unanimously find the defendant Monsanto guilty. These words filled a California courtroom in 2018 and shocked agricultural producers as the first of hundreds of lawsuits against agrochemical giant Monsanto Bayer filed in. The verdict on that August day changed the way Americans view food production and its relationship to our health, but it did not change science. When you get right down to it, health statistics in America are alarming. From 1990 to 2021, the United States experienced an 88% increase in cancer patients. And in 2021, asthma was more than twice as common in the United States than it was in most of Europe, Africa, or Asia. Additionally, autism spectrum disorder now affects 1 in 36 children nationwide, and 30% of adolescents are pre-diabetic today, while over 40% are overweight or obese. Now, I could spend my entire 8 minutes explaining to you how unhealthy America has become. However, I'd rather spend my time defending American agriculture and explaining why we are not all to blame. American policymakers have been responding to court case outcomes, health impacts, and the growing concern for food safety and chemical exposure. February 13th, 2025 marks the beginning of the Make America Healthy Again Commission, now led by the U.S. Secretary of Health, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. The goal is to study the cause of chronic diseases and charter a new path that prioritizes preventative care through proper nutrition. Although our nation spends nearly $5 trillion annually on healthcare, Americans are still becoming sicker. Thus, the MAHA Commission aims to redirect the national focus, many of these pointed right at American agriculture. With the inception of the commission came the rise of the MAHA movement. Its objective relates to the repositioning of U.S. food policy and exploring how Americans perceive the intersection of agriculture, health, and regulatory oversight. Many MAHA influencers believe that altering farming practices is vital in addressing chronic disease trends and reevaluating what it means to feed the nation. While the desire for healthier food options is understandable, I have concerns whether this approach is entirely sound. Their proposed changes to our farming methods will likely not improve health outcomes and could create additional challenges for the agricultural community. One of the prominent arguments heard right now is that agriculturalists need to find alternatives to unnatural products such as synthetic chemicals and biotech crops. Now, with that in mind, imagine walking through one of the many cornfields found in our state's Panhandle region. Each plant is its own miracle, genetically engineered to resist insects and tolerate herbicides and drought. Many proponents of Make America Healthy Again believe we should uproot our current system of production, phase out some of our current technologies, use less chemicals, eliminate GMOs, and shift completely to organic and regenerative production methods. RFK Jr. sums up his desires by saying we should move away from industrial agriculture that uses toxic synthetic chemicals. Along with many others, he believes that U.S. food production is poisoning Americans. Now, from a natural resources and environmental perspective, let me explain what would happen if we took Mr. Kennedy's advice. Organic agriculture yields about 1/3 as much as conventional agriculture. If half of our corn, soy, wheat, and hay acres were converted into organic and regenerative production methods, we would need an additional 33 million acres of land to keep up with our current output. That's about the same size as the state of Iowa. Converting this much grassland or forestry into farmland would release over 1.5 billion tons of carbon dioxide. This conversion to Maha-style agriculture would damage our economy and health as well. Lower yields leads to higher per unit cost and greater labor intensity. Organic crops generally cost about 50% more per bushel in input cost, and when food prices increase, people tend to purchase less, shifting the demand and market as well. So yes, organic and regenerative production methods may reduce the use of synthetic chemicals, but is it worth the increase in land use, higher emissions, and higher consumer prices? The use of synthetic chemicals has been a hot topic for many years, but farmers always seem to be excluded from the equation. For example, banning glyphosate, the key ingredient in Roundup, would increase farmers' annual cost by $650 million for corn and $850 million for soybeans. Rather than controlling weeds using herbicides, producers will have to repetitively till the soil, which could have a negative environmental impact. Under a full glyphosate ban, it's estimated that farmers will burn 84 million more gallons of diesel each year, while accelerating the erosion of the soil they worked so hard to protect. Still, alternative pesticides would have a detrimental impact on our ecosystem and could further harm our health. Glyphosate is one of the most widely known herbicides in the world. One reason is because it's the most effective and the least toxic. What about the Roundup Ready crops we grow here in Oklahoma? It's a common practice for wheat producers to use Roundup Ready canola in their wheat fields as a part of a rotational cropping system. Banning glyphosate would undo the positive impact that these crops have had in our wheat fields. Producers also depend on Roundup Ready corn, soy, and cotton to rid their fields of weed infestation. 2 generations ago, my family successfully grew their own food using organic and regenerative production methods. Now my farming family relies on agricultural innovations to make a living and feed the world. Times have definitely changed, and America's health has taken a turn for the worst, but now is not the time to add another list of regulations to the few of those who still work to feed the world. Our society increasingly trusts emotionally invested jurors whose decisions could have a negative impact on our farming methods. Instead, we should listen to food scientists, agriculture researchers, and federal agencies who have studied and approved our farming methods. Instead of jumping on the Maha bandwagon or joining RFK's fight to eliminate these important resources, we should listen to those who have scientific knowledge. We, the jurors, should find American agriculturalists not guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, Caitlin, and congratulations. I'll have your first question. So when it comes to some of the court cases here, have any of the plaintiffs actually been farmers that have been affected by these chemicals, or is it all driven by consumers?
There has been over 60,000 court cases with Monsanto, now Bayer's company, and if you try to look at any of the outcomes, whether it comes in the farmer's favor or the court cases, you cannot find any information whether which way the court case went.
Hello again. In your speech, you mentioned how current production methods are more efficient than the alternatives that's being pushed under the Make America Healthy Again initiative. Can you speak to why current levels of production and output should be maintained?
The reason that our current production is doing so well and that we are being able to maintain what we have now is because of these new agricultural innovations. Like I talked back in my speech, that my family was allowed to use these organic and regenerative production methods because they had the laborers to put in the work, and also they didn't have the technology, so they just had to do what they had. But now with these agricultural innovations and these different chemicals that we have today, it's important that we continue to use them, because at the end of the day, us as farmers, our jobs is to make the food for Americans to eat. And then with the Make America Healthy Again Commission, the goal is to have healthy foods, and us as farmers need to continue to produce that.
From your report.
Caitlin, you mentioned that RFK Jr. states we should move away from industrial agriculture. Please explain the term industrial agriculture to me, or what you think it means and how that relates to your family's operation.
Industrial agriculture, the easiest way to put it, is a large-scale operation. Like you could say maybe even Brahms, that would be an industrial. They do a lot of production. And what was the second part of your question?
How does that relate to your family's operation?
So yeah, the way industrial agriculture kind of works for my family's operation is my family owned a John Deere dealership for over 60 years, and I understand the importance of using technology like John Deere to, help the soil. But again, the industrial agriculture, it's important for us as industrial agriculturalists to use these different chemicals to be able to continue to produce the food for Americans.
In your research, you've done a lot of looks at looking at some of the judicial cases. In your opinion, do you think that we're going to survive these attacks on glyphosate? Most recently, we've got the Supreme Court now looking at it. What's the fate? What's the future, you think, for glyphosate?
I think that us as farmers we will have a great chance of not having a ban for glyphosate. Actually, in February of this year, Trump initiated the Defense Protection Act of 1950, stating that glyphosate is not only vital for military use, but also farmer use. While we have seen some different things at a federal level that are concerning, that we might see a ban in glyphosate with the Luna Amendment that's kind of going into the Farm Bill, with President Trump as our president now, I do not see a ban for glyphosate.
Caitlin, how long have farmers used glyphosate, and are there, or what is the best alternative if it should be banned?
Glyphosate was introduced commercially in 1974. And if glyphosate were to be banned, there are some different alternatives. Most commonly, you would hear 2,4-D, also known as dicamba, but it has been banned twice by the EPA due to its high toxicity levels, and it also is a pre-emergent compared to glyphosate being a post-emergent. Your second option is paraquat. Paraquat, you have to be licensed to use it and licensed to spray it because of its high toxicity levels, and paraquat would kill Roundup Ready crops as well. So it would therefore kind of take away what we're trying to do with Roundup Ready crops.
So you talk about the importance of feeding America, and then use corn quite a bit. But about 50% of the corn we grow in the U.S. goes to ethanol production, and then another pretty large share goes to feeding livestock. So why corn, and why should Americans care about what farmers are putting on their corn? And the majority of that actually goes to feeding animals and energy production.
It sparked a media frenzy and shocked the scientific community, prompting debates about the ethics of animal research. For starters, the project was completed in a secluded lab, protected by high-tech security, leading some to speculate that something unethical or inhumane was happening beyond its walls. Many members of the general public believed that humans were being cloned and armies were being created to destroy the world. On February 23, 1997, history was made. The Roslin Institute in Scotland introduced Dolly the sheep and announced it had created the first successful clone of a livestock animal. This discovery opened the doors to new medicines and disease treatments for humans. Yet, alongside this scientific leap came fierce ethical debates. fueled largely by the secrecy surrounding the project, leaving consumers fearful and skeptical of the unknown. Although the media frenzy has settled down quite a bit, the research on agricultural products and livestock has only gotten more technical and efficient. Dolly has long passed away, but what we learned from the Roslin Institute has led to an array of technological advancements and need for transparency. More specifically, scientists have discovered clustered, regularly interspaced, short palindromic repeats to improve livestock production by making it more efficient, economical, sustainable, and humane. While CRISPR and the creation of Dolly are both high-tech advancements impacting livestock, their scientific methods and applications are very different. Dolly represented cloning, while CRISPR is about precise gene editing. CRISPR technology had its own breakthrough just last year. In April, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration granted approval for a swine production company, PIC, to use CRISPR-Cas9 to create pigs resistant to the porcine reproductive and respiratory syndrome, one of the world's most damaging swine diseases. After years of research, this approval promises real benefits to consumers, farmers, and the pork industry, which has been desperate to a solution for PRRS. The use of CRISPR technology had its own oh my gosh, for PRRS. The use of CRISPR-Cas9 in agriculture extends beyond livestock. In the past, CRISPR has created seedless blackberries, non-browning bananas, and a tomato with high levels of vitamin D. Within the livestock industry, the FDA has approved gene-edited cattle with shorter, slicker hair for heat tolerance. Among these achievements, the PRRS-resistant pig stands out as the most significant advancement for livestock since the rise of CRISPR. Some even call it a game changer. Let me explain why. PRRS cost the pork industry over $1.2 billion annually between 2016 and 2020. Ashton Johnston, Industry Relations Manager of the Oklahoma Pork Council, agrees that PRRS has been a huge black eye on the pork industry. She states that the single largest impact to our industry that could be made would be reducing or controlling PRRS for commercial pork production. If we could control or eliminate the disease, the impacts would change the game of production. Potentially, we would witness higher born alive numbers, improved herd health, less veterinary intervention, less staffing, and a decreased need for medications, all of which play a major role in efficient pork production. Sustainability is one of the main benefits of disease-resistant livestock, as healthy livestock enable a more efficient food production. PRRS hinders sustainability because sick hogs require more feed, water, and land, ultimately increasing greenhouse gas emissions. According to Chad Groves, president and CEO of Seaboard Farms, reducing or controlling PRRS would allow the industry to produce 10 to 15% more pigs. It would also allow the U.S. pork industry to reduce the number of hogs by 10 to 15% to feed the same amount of people. In turn, this reduces the amount of feed, water, electricity, and other resources that improve the sustainability story for our industry. Despite CRISPR's benefits, FDA approval is just the first step towards commercial PRRS-free swine. Pork is traded globally, so further approval is needed in key markets like Canada, Mexico, Japan, and China. Acceptance from these countries would allow for open trade. Ashton Johnston believes that there would be a patchwork in trade regulations. All countries likely will not have a hard yes to accepting this pork, but the gains would eventually outweigh the drawbacks to our industry as a whole. We are near the 30-year anniversary of Dolly the sheep, and we are still learning from this discovery. Most public outrage came from the secrecy surrounding the project and cloning in general. However, gene editing research has remained transparent, with researchers sharing each step of the process with the world. This openness has led to a larger group supporting livestock genomics and reduced the chances of a media frenzy once commercial production begins. Members of the Oklahoma Pork Council and Seaboard Farms agree that the more the consumer knows and understands, the more they trust the producers. Today, more than ever, they want affordable food, but they also want to know where it came from and how it was produced. Increased trust and affordability raises the likelihood that our products will sell. Since gene editing only deletes genetic information rather than adding to or cloning, it may be an easier sell to consumers here and in other countries. Regardless, advocates must remain transparent to convince exporting partners and consumers here at home that gene editing is safe, promising, and vital to the future of agriculture and food production. Discoveries in agricultural science often generate moral concerns, but also spark creativity and advance sustainability. Just as in 1997 in Edinburgh, Scotland, when Dolly's birth created a lasting legacy, each innovation pushes boundaries. Although Dolly only lived 6 years, she had offspring that left an important mark on research. Consequently, embracing new technology, increasing transparency, and advancing food production, one discovery at a time, must guide us. After all, agriculture remains the backbone of progress. Thank you.
Thank you, Madeline. Congratulations. I'm going to have your first question today. You mentioned how CRISPR recently received FDA approval, particularly with pork. And you mentioned the need to try to get further approval in other markets. I'm curious if you're aware of gene editing of agricultural animals in other markets or other countries. Could you speak to that?
Absolutely. So right now, we are making monumental steps forward in other countries such as Mexico and Canada. Right now, there have actually been rumors that Mexico is doing their own PRRS-resistant pigs and developing work to do this, and I think this is a great gene editing example in a different country. Canada has also accepted the PRRS-resistant pig and is working towards it with Canada Health to hopefully develop it within their markets. Now, in terms of other gene-edited agriculture, there are some developments in China with disease-resistant wheat, which is able to withstand powdery mildew, and they're using CRISPR to do this. So right now, in these other countries, this is the gene editing that's happening outside of the United States.
You mentioned that pork is traded globally and that there might be issues with trade. So how does CRISPR technology impact trade with our global partners?
Right now, CRISPR is extremely scary to our trade partners because they think gene editing, which is CRISPR, is the same as GMOs. However, what they don't understand is genetically modified organisms are taking foreign DNA and putting it into a different animal, therefore increasing susceptibility to diseases, while gene editing only works with what was already within the animal. And that's the huge speculations and skepticism that we're seeing in these key countries. So what we're trying to do is develop FDA approval processes and kind of help balance that trade barrier that we have, as well as bring across consumer acceptance, because that's the main problem. We do this through the National Pork Board setting aside over $9 million for consumer research in other countries so that hopefully we can develop and get the right mindset and education.
Talked about the need for transparency. You indicated maybe gene editing, CRISPR's maybe got a little bit better job. But how do we expand on that? How do we successfully tell that story? Because there are a lot of folks that don't like animal agriculture as we produce in this country. We've got a lot of money. How do we come up against them?
Right now, the name gene editing can be extremely scary for consumers. And so I think expanding and making this better and more educational, we could change the name and call it intentional genetic alterations, which is another span underneath the overall umbrella of gene editing. And I think this would make consumers more accepting. Another thing that we need to point out as producers is that we're gonna see a 10% decrease in the cost for consumers. Right now, urban citizens aren't going to care about how PRRS-resistant pigs affect the producers, but how it impacts them. So I think it's important that we share the reduce in 8% of carbon emissions that it's going to offer, the reduced use of antibiotics, which is going to make the animal protein 20% more efficient for our consumers, as well as the ability how this is not only going to impact the producers, but also the consumers. And we can do this through different educational programs.
Can you explain to me exactly how CRISPR works, how we're using it to make hogs PRRS resistant, and how long it's going to take to get that through the commercial swine industry?
So to develop a PRRS-resistant hog and use CRISPR, you're first going to take not a live animal, but the embryo. And what you're gonna do is take the CRISPR and you're gonna insert it, and I like to think of it as a strand of beads. And in the middle sits a magnet. And so if you take that magnet out, it can no longer be attached to, say, a paper clip. In this instance, the paper clip acts as the PRRS disease, and the magnet acts as the specific binding site. So the CRISPR-Cas9 is a pair of molecular scissors that cuts out this specific magnet so that the PRRS disease can no longer bind to the CD163 protein gene that allows the PRRS disease to enter. This is a generationally passed down immuneness, so it's going to take years upon years as it's bred throughout the herd. However, right now it's not available for commercialized production because our key exporting countries are not on board.
Can this technology be used to produce more meat with fewer animals, or is it really more being used for disease resistance to kind of indirectly make farms and agricultural animal production more productive?
That's a great question, and it's actually doing both, because whenever I spoke with Chad Groves, president and CEO of Seaboard Farm,
you hear the sounds first. Boots hitting the pavement, boxes sliding across trailers, freezers rolling into place, voices calling out times and totals. For a moment, you might think you wandered into a NASCAR pit lane or the starting gate of a horse race. Everything is moving fast, everyone has a job, and the clock is ticking. But it's not a racetrack. It's a Saturday morning farmer's market. Around me are nearly 80 producers all racing against the same deadline. In one load, we unload fresh farm goods, unhook tow straps, and pull out boxes of value-added products. Within minutes, backdrops are up, tables are dressed, signage is placed, and displays are transformed. What looks like chaos from the outside is actually precision, teamwork, and preparation. Just like any great race, success doesn't happen on accident. It's built long before the gates ever open. This routine is personal to me because I work alongside local producers at one of Oklahoma's oldest farmers markets through my employer, Johnny K's Farm Store. This operation is a fourth-generation, 203-acre beef and hay farm located in Cleveland County. Land intentionally kept in agriculture instead of becoming another housing subdivision. After the loss of the family's patriarch, selling directly to consumer became a way to protect the farm's future. When cattle prices dropped to 45 cents per pound, selling retail cuts kept the farm alive, bringing $8 to $9 per pound. The Norman Farmers Market didn't just generate income, it kept the operation alive. But here's what matters most. Farmers markets don't just keep farms in business, they build trust with the people they feed. From 1994 to 2020, the number of farmers markets in the United States grew from 1,755 to over 8,600. According to the USDA, producers sold $17.5 billion in food through local and direct marketing channels, a 25% increase since 2017. Demand for local food isn't fading, it's evolving. Direct-to-consumer sales are still strong, but more farms are selling to schools, hospitals, and retailers. Many are also working together through food hubs to reach larger markets. More than 60,000 farms reported over $14.2 billion in sales to retailers and institutions, showing rapid growth beyond direct-to-consumer markets. Farmers markets themselves account for part of this growth, with over $3.3 billion in direct-to-consumer sales reported in 2022. This isn't just a local trend, it's a shift in how agriculture is marketed, sold, and sustained. Selling food is only part of the race. The other race agriculture must win is trust. I see the trust gap every weekend at the market. I've been asked, is your beef clean? Do you add chemicals? Is it sustainable? Those questions can feel insulting, but most of the time they come from confusion, not criticism. When I ask, what does organic mean to you? Most people say, no chemicals at all. That question opens a door for conversation. We explain we aren't organic, but we practice responsible management, rotating cattle on pastures, balancing forages, and supplementing when needed. The goal isn't to argue, it's to inform. And almost every time the response is the same. I didn't know that. That moment matters. Surveys show consumers care deeply about animal welfare, yet few can define what good care actually means. Less than 2% of Americans live or work on farms, and most rely on media for information, where negative news travels much faster than the truth. Yet, farming and ranching remain among the most trusted professions in the country. That credibility gives agriculture an opportunity, if we're willing to engage. At farmers markets, consumers don't just buy food, they meet the farmer. They ask questions, they hear stories. Trust is built face to face. Today's farmers are no longer just producers, we are communicators, not to preach, but to relate. Not to argue, but to explain. Because between the loudest extremes sits the movable middle, the voters who influence policy, funding, and public trust. As Ann L. Alonzo of the USDA Agricultural Marketing Service said, farmers markets have become a critical ingredient in our nation's economy, food systems, and communities, connecting rural to urban, farmer to consumer. Step into the market and you're not just witnessing a transaction, you're watching agriculture explain itself in real time. In a city like Norman, most people will never step foot on a working ranch, so the farmer's market becomes their only connection to a producer. While those conversations are happening across the table, there are conversations happening across this country that could reshape agriculture entirely. In Oregon, proposed legislation has even suggested banning animal agriculture altogether, including hunting and fishing. That kind of idea doesn't come from people who understand agriculture. It comes from people who have never been connected to it. And that's the risk. The people walking through the market are voters. What they understand about agriculture will shape the decisions they make long after they leave. So here's the finish line. If you're a producer, use farmers markets not only as a business strategy, but as an educational platform. If you're a community leader or policymaker, support them through zoning protection, infrastructure, and institutional purchasing. And if you're a voter, connect with your local farmers. Because the more you know about how your food is produced, the better decisions you can make. Because this Saturday morning race isn't just about speed, it's about transparency, trust, stewardship, and keeping agriculture competitive long after the starting bell rings. That's not just the market, that's agriculture showing up. That's advocacy and action, and that's the sound of producers fighting, not just to sell a product, but to protect a way of life. And that's a race we can't afford to lose. Thank you.
Congratulations, Carly, for being here and presenting to us. You mentioned USDA in your speech. How does USDA support or invest in farmers markets?
One of the biggest ways, and it's actually in the current farm bill that's being passed right now, the USDA has a program called the Local Agricultural Marketing Service. And if this is getting passed, right now it has $26.8 million that's going to support local food systems directly. And 11 million of those dollars is going directly to supporting and expanding farmers markets. And another 11 million of those dollars are going to things like shipping, distributions, and storaging. And so what that means practically for farmers at farmers markets is it makes it easier for us to get our product to consumers and sell it profitably, and it lowers our input costs of getting it into consumers' hands.
One quote I was very interested in that you mentioned, the other place agriculture must win is trust. What's the strategy? How do we do that successfully?
You know, I honestly think it comes down to conversation. Right now, 59% of Americans are unaware that less than 2% are farmers and ranchers feeding the rest of the U.S. So it doesn't have to be big, it doesn't have to be major, but I think if we can connect consistently with consumers and have those conversations, I think that's the starting line of building trust to consumers. And not only that, but we also have a lot of advocacy programs in the state of Oklahoma that help us reach consumers on a larger level, like Oklahoma Farm Bureau, American Farmers and Ranchers, the Oklahoma Pork Council, and even the Oklahoma Cattlemen's Association.
Carly, you talk about how farmers markets can be a benefit to farmers and all the good things that can come out of marketing your product there. Can you talk to me about maybe some liabilities that farmers could face or how they can protect themselves?
So one way that farmers can protect themselves is if they're an LLC, or we are a sole proprietor, so we purchase liability insurance. But some of those liabilities could be food safety concerns. If someone has an issue with our beef and is trying to contact someone, and that's why as meat producers, we go through ODAF and we purchase a meat distributing license. And under that gives us our food safety regulations that helps protect us from any of those concerns.
So I have a two-part question. The first question is, you mentioned when cattle prices dropped to 45 cents per pound. Do you know what cattle prices are today?
Right now, for a 1,000-pound calf, we're averaging $3 a pound.
So that's a big increase. So how do farmers, from an agribusiness perspective, how do farmers stay nimble and change? You know, they change to selling directly to farmers, but would it be more profitable to shift and not do that? How do you stay nimble, and what's that business strategy there when prices change that much?
I think for sure it would definitely be more financially stable and increase our finances if we were to ship these cattle to the stockyards and get that money back. But at the end of the day, it has to come down to your priorities. And for us, we are a niche market. It's not for everyone, but we know at the end of the day that having those conversations and connecting with consumers face to face is so crucial for this day and age.
Carly, I've got a question about the legislation that you referred to in Oregon. Can you speak to some of the specifics about that proposed legislation and what it includes or didn't include?
So the legislation in Oregon is actually an initiative petition. It's IP 28. And right now what they're trying to do is rewrite Oregon's animal production laws that they have in place. Right now Oregon's animal production laws have exemptions for things like farming, meat consumption, and scientific research. And what this IP28 is going to do is remove all exemptions, therefore removing animal agriculture altogether.
You mentioned that more producers are now not just exploring farmers markets, but they can get their products into retail locations or institutions. What is the difference in licensing and protocols that they need to go through to market to those different areas?
Small but mighty. Something I've remembered to believe of myself while showing a 1,400-pound steer ever since I was 9. Over the years, I have learned that there are many things in this world that are small but mighty. As issues arise concerning the environment, we often think big in order to fix this large problem. But what if it is something small that will lead to a solution? Society is certainly aware of the issues with landfills, waste, and pollution. We desperately need a way to efficiently reduce these things. One solution to this is none other than mushrooms. These organisms can decompose not only deceased matter, but synthetic materials as well. Whether mushrooms are destroying pollutants or bringing restoration to a farmer's soil, there are a vast amount of possibilities being discovered. Many different companies and universities have begun putting new methods into practice. And as discoveries continue to grow, I believe that this is only the beginning of a small thing becoming a massive solution. Who would have thought that as we move forward to decreasing pollution and waste, mushrooms would be the key? 8.3 billion metric tons of plastic have been produced since the 1960s. And because modern landfills are dry and oxygen poor, it's impossible for anything to decompose properly. The solution to this is Pestilodiopsis fungi, which was discovered in the Amazon in 2011. This species of fungi is able to decompose plastic in anaerobic conditions. Mushrooms are able to decompose matter with a process called mycormediation. Mycormediation is a natural and sustainable cleanup method that involves mushrooms releasing enzymes that break down toxic pollutants, transforming them into harmless byproducts. Scientists estimate that plastic takes about 400 years to decompose on its own. To me, it is incredible that with mycormediation, mushrooms can break down plastic in just a few months. Here in the United States, the biotech company, Mycocycle, is using mushroom growth to help break down construction waste, like asphalt shingles, insulation board, and other hard-to-recycle materials. The fact that mushroom growth can break down shingles and insulation is remarkable. Different varieties of mushrooms have different properties that can grow through and break down even the toughest materials. For example, many plastics are extremely difficult to recycle, and some cannot be recycled at all. Polypropylene accounts for 28% of global plastic, but only 1% of it is recycled. Oyster mushrooms, being one of the most effective mushrooms when it comes to breaking down plastic, can decompose polypropylene in as little as 2 to 13 weeks. Another example is the University of Washington using oyster mushrooms to help clean soil that has been contaminated by oil spills. The oyster mushrooms are able to decompose oil continuously for months, breaking down the complex compounds into simple, unstable forms.
This discovery has had a tremendous impact on the soil and groundwater often affected by such accidents. Earth's natural cleaning process of leaching and decomposition can take decades to clean an oil spill. Mushrooms, however, work faster and more efficiently with the environment to decontaminate the soil. On an even smaller level, microscopic fungi have proved to be essential in isolating carbon in the soil and play a massive role in supporting crop health. The microscopic fungi act like a second set of roots, extending the plant's ability to take in water and nutrients. Most agricultural soil is dominated by bacteria, which is not necessarily a bad thing. However, it is important to have a balanced ratio of both bacteria and fungi because bacteria is the dominant decomposer, while fungi is more efficient in delivering nutrients to plants. Farmers that grow row crops, such as corn and soybeans, must rely on the remaining fungi in the soil that survived decades of chemical application. A recent study done by Timothy Robb, a small-scale farmer in southern Mississippi, shows how he was able to replenish the fungi in his soil. He accomplished this by seeping his compost, almost like a tea, extracting the microorganisms in water, and then running that water through his irrigation system. Although this process adds millions of fungi species back to the soil, it takes well over a year to completely balance out the ratio between fungi and bacteria. This natural process could be an alternative to spending thousands of dollars on fertilizer. As agriculturists, we must constantly continue adapting and improving in order to better ourselves. And this new method could be the next step in making the agriculture industry the best that it can be. Fungi have an immense amount of possibilities, and I am eager to see what future discoveries and innovation will do to improve our lives. Mushrooms have proved to be more than capable of destroying pollutants. I believe that as more people are informed of this, the more it will impact the reduction of pollution. As for using fungi to support crop health, I think there is huge potential for this idea to grow and positively impact farmers. Although fungi are seemingly small and unimportant, there is no denying that they have led to massive ideas and discoveries. I'm reminded, yet again, of the inspiring abilities of the small but mighty. Thank you.
Congratulations, glad you're here today.
Thank you.
Fascinated with this concept. Are these types of mushrooms, are any of these edible, or is this a totally separate class from the ones that we'll find over in the local grocery store?
That is a great question, and what I'm about to tell you is going to sound bizarre, but the oyster mushrooms and another type of mushroom called aspergillus are actually able to be eaten after they have decomposed the plastic. And it sounds insane, but these mushrooms are completely safe to consume, and I myself am not a mushroom eater, but for those who are, and for those interested in selling these mushrooms and making a profit after using them to benefit their company or their operation, these mushrooms can be sold to restaurants and be eaten. If yes, that is something that can be done with those mushrooms.
Can you explain to me exactly how the mushrooms break down the plastics and how long it takes?
So to give you a picture, the ratio of one mushroom in a piece of plastic is one mushroom and 2 weeks for that piece of plastic. But it depends, of course, on the type of plastic and the amount of mushrooms we have.
the mushrooms have been seen to decompose 60% of an average sized landfill in about 6 months. And if you don't know what landfills look like, they are massive. And so it's something that is being used to efficiently decompose this waste in a very time efficient manner.
So one of the mushrooms or fungi you mentioned was discovered in the Amazon in 2011. So I know with animals, we worry about invasive species kind of transporting them to other places. Is that the same for fungi? Are there risks related to bringing fungi out of their natural habitat and using it somewhere else?
That's a great question. And anytime we talk about invasive species coming into effect, you have to take this into consideration because we've seen the negative effects of this. And mushrooms are actually grown in a wooden box. That's how the mushroom producers grow their mushrooms. They're stacked wooden boxes that are quite large in order to hold them. And so it's not something you have to worry about being an invasive species because it's being grown in a contained environment. And the universities and scientists that are experimenting with them are also growing them in a contained environment. So you don't have to worry about the spread of a harmful species into the US. But when they're transported to those landfills, it's also something that you don't have to worry about affecting other wildlife because it's a contained environment and they're able to just live in those landfills and thrive off of the waste and pollution.
Sierra, you mentioned in your speech various examples of mushrooms and specific examples. I'm curious if you could give us some specific examples of the microscopic fungi that you mentioned being used to assist with soil health.
So the microscopic fungi are actually just different variants of the fungal spores. So fungal spores are what develop in order to create this fungi. And so what I talk about when I am mentioning that microscopic fungi is actually just the general species. There's no different kinds that we see. It's just the general basic form of that fungi. And that is what is so essential to our crop production. And that is why that we see different producers experimenting with it to see how implementing this can help balance that bacteria, and it's been seen to increase crop yields by up to 40%.
So if I'm a manager of a landfill of a community of about 100,000 people, how much is it going to cost me to implement using mushrooms in my landfill to break down plastics?
So I think the answer to that question ultimately comes back to the cost of mushrooms themselves. And right now, mushrooms are $1.55 per pound. And so that's not very much money. And producers are able to generate these fungal spores to grow their mushrooms. And then companies and universities either looking to experiment with or use them are able to get them from those producers for a relatively low price. And it's something that's very efficient, both with cost and with the results. And I think that as these discoveries continue to grow, there's going to be government involvement, and they might, you never know, they might offer tax incentives for these producers, or they might give tax credits to companies that are wanting to use this, or apply grants to these things so that can be more widely used. Thank you very much.